Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today it is my long-awaited APAC region power rankings. If you didn't see my Western region power rankings, I did them before the season started, so those rankings are not necessarily reflective of things that have been going on in the league, and I already hate my preseason power rankings for NA. But if you didn't see those and you want to check them out, they'll be linked in the description at the end of the video and right now in the cards if you want to check that out before you watch this one. I didn't do any kind of big overall power ranking because when I was making my NA one, the whole Chengdu Hunters roster was still kind of in flux, and so I didn't really feel like it was the best time to do that. But now that roster is situated, so we kind of have an idea of where all the teams will be. And so, of course, we have 7 teams in the APAC region: the Chengdu Hunters, the Guangzhou Charge, the Hangzhou Spark, the LA Valiant, Philadelphia Fusion, Seoul Dynasty, and the Shanghai Dragons. And so, there's going to be my power rankings. My power rankings are based on basically how likely I think that team is to win the championship. So the team that I think is most likely to win the championship will be at the top of the rankings. At least, in this case, let's say the team to walk away from the APAC region with the most likelihood of winning the championship at the top, and least likely at the bottom. And so that is what you need to know for this power rankings. So let's jump in, let's get into it, and let's start with number 7 in my APAC rankings. At number 7, I have actually a bit of a potentially controversial pick. I've seen a lot of people put this team actually somewhat higher than I have them, but I have them here at number 7, and that is the LA Valiant. Yes, this team is significantly better than they were last season. I am not even going to sit here and say that this is a bad team. I think this is actually a team with a good amount of talent on this team, a coach that I believe in a lot in No Hill, whose success in contenders over the past several years is nothing to scoff at. They have been incredibly successful, incredibly dominant at times while he was the coach for Team CC in contenders. They kind of fell apart after No Hill left, and that shows you kind of how good of a coach he is. And he brings with him some pretty strong, talented pieces. People like Dia, who is returning to the Overwatch League after a pretty long hiatus. And Innovation and Becky, who are relatively well rated players coming out of contenders. You have Coldus and Langsa as a support line, which is a pretty strong Chinese support line. My biggest issue with this roster, though, is I do not feel great about Sashin being the only tank on this roster. He, to me, seems like the weakest of all of the tanks in the entire region, and he is the only tank on this team. So I don't have a ton of faith in him being the only tank. We haven't seen a ton of off-tank play. Zarya's been pretty good, so Sashin is a very strong Zarya, so if Zarya is meta, I think he will benefit from that pretty well. They also have a 5 DPS rotation. I already mentioned Dia, Innovation, and Becky. They also have Ezon and Haker. So Haker's a Sombra one-trick that's always going to play, so maybe he'll play at some point in time. I don't like the idea of a 5 DPS rotation. I don't like the idea of this constant kind of switching and switching and switching. Maybe one of them plays Doomfist like we've seen some of the other teams in the Western region play. I don't really know. I don't feel super confident, though, in this roster as a solid core. I think they have some really good individual pieces. I think they have a very good head coach. But I'm just not quite ready to say this is going to be a really good team in a region that I think has gotten better across the board. It's hard for me to look at this Valiant roster that while I do think they've gotten better and I think they will win games this season, I still don't quite think they are enough for me to put them above the bottom spot in the APAC region. At number 6, I have the Guangzhou Charge, and I'm pretty happy with what this team has managed to put together this season. I don't think they have the most talented roster, but I do respect the fact that this roster is very well rounded. They have covered pretty much every basis that you can imagine. They have a 3 DPS rotation with Eileen, Choi Se-won, and Develop, which I think is a pretty solid rotation. Choi Se-won looked very good last season whenever he was given the ability to actually kind of pop off. The team around him was not very good, but this is a far more kind of well-rounded roster he is on now. That backline of Unique, Molly, and Farway 1987, big fan of that. Gives them the flexibility. If they need to run double flex support, they can with Molly and Farway. I wouldn't be surprised if Farway takes a starting spot for Molly, as much as I love Molly. Adding Farway seems like a very possible move towards having him as a starter instead of Molly. unique in the main support role. Main support's been very important so far, so that's a very good addition there. And with Rio and Krong, as much as I think Rio is a pretty middle-of-the-pack average main tank, he at least gives you that ability to run the Winston, to run the Reinhardt if you really need it. But Krong will probably get a lot of the playtime, and I think that one of the things that actually is beneficial for the Charge is that they have one really good tank player in Krong, and that gives him the ability to be the only tank player playing. And so while Rio will probably be there for some of that kind of flexibility and some of that depth and some of those hero pool kind of additions, I like the fact that this team can just run Krong as much as they want or as much as they need. And I think that will be beneficial to this roster because I think he getting to dictate the tempo, getting to dictate the way this team plays is going to be a very big kind of thing for this team. Ultimately, the reason why I have this team as low as I do is just because I think their ceiling is not as high as most of the other teams in this region. I think they have the potential to punch up. I think this is definitely a very close APAC region. I don't think there's a real stinker in this region. I don't think there's like a team that I look at and I just say this team is going to be terrible. This team just to me does not have the same high ceiling that I'm looking for and that I see in some of the other teams in the region. And so for me, that is why ultimately they are only down here in the 6th spot. Up next at number 5, I have the Hangzhou Spark. And this is a team that has a ton of flexibility. They have 4 DPS players, they have 3 tanks, they have 2 supports, which is maybe where they have a little bit of potential kind of room where I think they could have done a little bit better. But ultimately, this is a team that I think has some very solid pieces and I think looks pretty good. They definitely have some flexibility, potential kind of hiccups that we're seeing with a team like Boston, who they have 3 tanks, they're trying to make them all work. It's not really working. I hope the Spark really do just kind of say go full on with Gushui as much as possible. I think that's the route they're going to likely go with, but we'll see for sure what happens. Only 2 supports, but I think that's fine because they have a main support and a flex support. They can cover pretty much everything they need. And I feel really confident in their DPS line with Shy or Alpha Yi. They can cover pretty much everything if you need Pineapple and a double hit scan or even Architect potentially, depending on what the meta is. Genji's pretty good right now, so even potentially their Architect could be returning to peak Architect Genji form. But you also Alpha Yi for that role, so they have options there. I'm hesitant to put them any higher because we have seen so many times Hangzhou Spark do a lot of those things that I think are coaching mistakes. They do have a new head coach this season in Changun, who has had some success in the past. He has not been a largely successful head coach. I mean, he was the head coach for the Seoul Dynasty for a while, and that's kind of really what he was known for. Obviously, he was on the London Spitfire as well for their inaugural season win, which was probably his biggest achievement, I would say. But he's always been a coach that's kind of looked at as a good coach. He's not really like an excellent coach, and he's always made some questionable coaching decisions. It's kind of been one of the things that people have criticized the Spitfire in 2018 and the Dynasty in 2019 and 2020 and a bit in 2021 for. And so I'll be interested in seeing kind of what he does with his roster and how he makes it work. I think this team, where the Charge, I think, have a little bit more flexibility, or at least a little more clear identity than the Spark. I think the Spark have just more talent. I think Shy and Alpha Yi and Gushui and Irony Super H is a very solid core roster, if that is what they've run the majority of the season. I feel very good about them. I think it's pretty close between them and Guangzhou. I don't feel like one of those teams is infinitely or significantly better than the other. I think they're both pretty close, but I do give the Spark just a slight edge over the Charge because I feel a little bit more confident in their ceiling and their overall talent than I do that of the Guangzhou Charge. All right, number 4, the halfway part of this power ranking, I have the Chengdu Hunters. Now, I know there are going to be people who say, how can you have Chengdu here when this is the team that was the second best team in the APAC region last season? They were one of the best teams in the league. They did, they made the playoffs. They made 2 tournament finals. How could you put them in this spot? And I'll be open and honest with you and just say that I don't think this Hunters roster is better than they were last season. I think this roster is in a number of ways worse than they were last season. Now, they hold on to Nisha and Monk, which is, in my opinion, the 2 biggest pieces from last season, with the exception of Leave, that I thought they needed to kind of hold on to build this team around, alongside MVP Leave. So they keep Leave, they keep Nisha, they keep Monk. To me, the support line is solid as everything. I have a lot of faith in that support line. They keep Gaga in that main tank role, and they add Daisy or Daisy. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced. I believe it's supposed to be Daisy, but I could be wrong. As a secondary tank, as an off-tank player, so someone who can play. There's Diva and the Zarya, the Sigma, stuff like that. So that's a good addition for this team. I expected them to add him when I knew they needed an off-tank player because he played on Team Chaser, so it kind of made sense for him to be the one that was added. My biggest complaint with this team, my biggest problem with this team, and this is my issue with a number of teams in the league, it's my issue with New York, it's my issue with Paris. I have a lot of problems when teams only have 2 DPS players. I think this team will not nearly be as good as they could be when they only have Leave and Jinmu. Leave and Jinmu are both really good players, but there are so many limitations to what this team is going to be able to do with only these 2 players. Now, the talent on this roster is immense. We are talking about last year's MVP, arguably 2 of the best rookies from last season, Anisha and Monk, Gaga, who was a very solid tank for this team, and Jinmu, who has been arguably the best Pharah in the league, and Hanzo and Genji are some of the best in the league as well. But this team lacks a lot of DPS flexibility. I would have liked if they held on to Aprita. They obviously moved on from him. They signed him for this season, and then they moved on from him. I think he would have been a very big piece for this team. I honestly, personally, would have rather them hold on to Aprita than add Daitzi to this roster. I think that there are serious limitations for this team that we saw last season because they only felt comfortable running Leave and Jinmu. That means they can't run double hit scan. They really are kind of stuck playing around what Jinmu is good at. It is the same problem I have with New York right now. I think there is a lot of talent on this roster. I think it's way too limiting. And I think unless they are in the right meta, they are going to struggle against an APAC region that has gotten significantly better from last season. And so for me, I put them here in the middle of the pack. I think talent is the thing that really elevates them above your Hangzhou Sparks, your Guangzhou Charges, and your LA Valiants. But I don't think they have the flexibility and the ability to adapt that the teams above them are going to have, and that I think those other teams will take advantage of. And so for me, the Chengdu Hunters are the middle of the pack here in the APAC region at the number 4 spot. Moving into the upper half of the APAC power rankings, at number 3, I have the Philadelphia Fusion. This roster I feel very, very good about. I think it's not the best roster in this region, of course. I think there are a lot of question marks. There are a number of rookies on this roster, 4 I believe to be exact. But it is a roster that I think has a lot of potential to perform at a high level. The obvious thing that people are going to talk about, and they're going to be a lot of eyeballs on this season, is Aim God having to replace Alarm. It's very difficult to replace somebody like Alarm, and the fact that Alarm was lost this offseason is one of the saddest and just most disappointing things that happened, and you wish that wasn't what this team had to deal with, and this community and that family had to go with. But they've rebuilt and they've done what they can, and I still think that this roster is a formidable roster going forward. And I really love this team's DPS line. Carpe returns. He is still going to be the probable centerpiece of this roster. But I think they finally have found the person who may be the future for this team in MN3. Another hitscan player. Carpe MN3 will probably get a lot of playtime together in that double hitscan role potentially. It'll be curious to kind of see what happens with those two. But they round out the DPS roster with Zest. They have a lot of potential on Tracer compositions. They have a lot of potential on just whatever they need in terms of kind of, double hit scan, and kind of flex DPS. This is a very well-rounded DPS lineup. AimGod and Fixa are a support line that I feel good about. I don't think they're necessarily going to be the best support line in the league or in the region, but I think they are solid, and I feel confident in their ability to, at the very least, kind of hold their weight in this region, especially when I think with AimGod, the thing that AimGod was always good at was mechanics, and I think that is going to be one of the things that really kind of differentiates him. But for me, really, the thing that I look at that I am in love with on this roster is the tank line of Fury and Belosria. Fury, to me, is going to be the star for this roster. They are going to try to play Fury as much as they can because his off-tank has been one of the best in the history of the Overwatch League. And I think that with Zarya potentially being meta, Fury is somebody to keep your eye on, to be a pretty dominant tank in this region. I think when you look at all of the tanks that are playing in this region, right, you have 3 really, really good ones that are going to be kind of competing with Fury. You have Void and Fate there on the Shanghai Dragons, and you have Smurf on the Seoul Dynasty. Fury is in that category, though, of elite level tanks, and this is really one of the first players that we have so far on this video that I think is one of those like GOAT level players. Leave is up there as well, I think, but this is really what we're looking at with elite level play and sustained success. And Bellisria is there to fill in those holes, to play that Reinhardt, to play that Winston. And I think this team is a very strong contender for a solid roster. There's a lot of question marks, obviously, a number of rookies on this team that I think will be the big thing that, for me, keeps me from putting them any higher than this. They have the talent. I think this is a roster that has the flexibility to succeed. It's just that there are too many question marks, and I don't feel confident putting them any higher than number 3. And number 2, I have the Seoul Dynasty. We all know who number 1 is going to be. We all knew when you clicked on this video. The question really was going to be who would I have in 2 through 7, and here we have the Seoul Dynasty taking that 2nd overall spot. I really like what this roster is for this season. I think the Fitz, Prophet, and Stalker DPS trio is one of the best in the league. I think the addition of Stalker is very nice because he is a very flexible player. He's a young talent. I think he will actually have an opportunity to play, which we never saw from Savioli last season. And I think he will allow this team to have a lot more flexibility, which was not really a problem for this team in the past, but I think he just provides some fresh legs and some fresh energy to that DPS line that I think will be greatly valued. And of course, they have Smurf as their tank, which I think is an incredible addition. We look at Smurf as potentially one of the best tanks in Overwatch League history, as one of the best over the past couple of years in particular. Obviously, dominance on the San Francisco Shock cannot be understated. And so I think that I look at this addition, and he can play a lot of different things as well. So I feel very confident that Smurf will be able to kind of adjust to the single tank pretty well. Creative and Vindame, of course, as the support line, is another thing I feel pretty good about. Their creative was pretty good last season. Losing Jonak, I think, hurts this team to a degree, but I do think that the kind of clear direction now for this team's support line, you're not going to have any issues potentially with Creative and Jonak splitting time. I think that will help this team out a little bit as well. And so overall, I feel very confident about this team. This is a solid roster with some very, very, very big name players in Fitz and Prophet and Smurf. And I think this is a roster that really, for me, is among those rosters that you should expect to do well. The Dynasty have been a very good team over the past couple of seasons, but they have really struggled in those big games. Yes, they made the grand finals in 2020, but the meta changed and kind of favored them. But they didn't win any tournaments over the past several years. They've never won anything during their time in the Overwatch League. And so it's going to be interesting to see if this is the season, if Toby as their head coach can lead them to some type of tournament championship, to some type of title somewhere. This is Seoul, right? This is the home of so many of these players in the Overwatch League. This is the team in so many ways, and they have struggled a lot. But to me, this is the best look they've ever had. This is a roster with a clear direction. It is trimmed, it is small, it is focused, and it is full of very, very talented pieces. I feel very confident about this Dynasty roster. I think they're going to be a very good team this season, and so I have them here at number 2 on this APAC ranking. But obviously, I have the Shanghai Dragons at number 1. I mean, come on, everybody. We are talking about the defending champions here, who still look to have players that are among the best in the entire league. They have Fleta and Lip, who Fleta, MVP in 2020, and Lip was probably second place in MVP voting last season. I think he was second place in voting last season. Izayaki Lee Jigon might be the best support line in the league. Oh, and they added Bebe there, just for that extra flexible flex support kind of play if they need it. They have Void and Fate, 2 of the best tanks in the game, and they have Who Are You as the final piece in that DPS line, who may never get any playtime, also could be potentially the thing that is the key to this team's success, and their flexibility and their ability to do well. This roster is very, very good, right? This roster is the best-looking roster in the Overwatch League right now. There is very little reason to think that they are not going to be among the best rosters this season. They were a top team in 2020, and they were a top team in 2021. I expect 2022 to be much of the same. Yes, the league has gotten better around them, but the Dragons were so much better than the rest of the teams in the Overwatch League last season that the Dragons, even with the minimal changes they made, they still look to be a better roster than they were last season, which is a scary, scary thing to imagine. A world where the Dragons are better than they were last season. I think we very likely could see a dynasty form here with the Dragons. They could repeat just like the Shock did in 2019 and 2020, and we will start to ask the question, if that happens, of what team is truly the best team in the history of the Overwatch League if the Dragons are able to repeat again, and who is truly the best coach in Overwatch League history between Moon and Krusty. It'll be a very interesting argument if it happens, if we get there. But we haven't gotten there yet, so let's not jump the gun too much. But obviously the Dragons, they're the top team in the league. That's not even a question. There's not even really anything to try to figure out with this. This is pretty much exactly what we expected from this team this season, to be another elite level team. And so I think they're still number one here in the APAC region, and I think they're number one overall in the league still. Even after all these other rosters got better, I still think they're all still chasing the Shanghai Dragons. And that is my list. That is my power rankings for 2022 for the APAC region. Here's the full list. You can see 1 to 7. It's very short, obviously, only 7 teams, but very excited for the APAC matches to kick off here this weekend. Very excited to see what happens this time around. It is going to be quite the show this season to see kind of where we are going forward. I'm very interested to see kind of how the APAC region differs from the Western region. Excited for the midseason madness tournament where we actually get to see those teams kind of collide and clash. That'll be very fun to see, and I'm excited to kind of see where things go this season with the split regions. Obviously, we kind of go back to 2020 where they didn't get to meet until the end of the season. Now we're going to kind of see that in the midseason and the end of the season. But we don't get those 4 monthly tournaments we did last season where all the teams will meet. So it'll be intriguing to see kind of where things stand when we get to the midseason, kind of who is able to hold the trophy here. But with the APAC region kicking off this weekend, this is where I think these teams will finish when all is said and done, and how I think they fare as potential title teams. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on this power rankings. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I have these teams too high, too low? Whatever. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. That is going to be all from me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. I'm going to get out of here. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.